Okay, so that's bad, right? And you know, I like to be a troublemaker. There were some people from the government who were coming and talking to things, and I did the same thing with them. And they laughed, and they said, well, we don't think it's that bad. And I said, actually, it's worse. Here's how it's worse. They get all of their depth in certain courses. They get all of their depth in other courses. And so really what this looks like is this. It's not a T. They're completely disconnected. But it even gets worse because they take their breadth in separate courses. So really what they get is anthropology, philosophy, religion, psychology, right? None of them are connected. So you say you want to do this philosophically, but what we're really doing is something that looks like that. And you know what? They're still nerds. And you just force them to take a bunch of courses that they didn't want to take. So you've actually done, in some ways, something worse. So what do you do about that? I don't have the answer. I think very rarely do we have, like, you know, the answer the way a mathematician would talk about getting the answer. But here was an idea that I had. The problem is that they're not connecting the courses, right? They don't see how they connect. And the reason why is because we just expect that it's going to all make sense in their head. Now here's what usually happens. They go be an engineer for 30 years. They rise up through management, and eventually they kind of collect enough stuff that it eventually forms a team. The good engineers, the ones that are paying attention. So eventually when they get to be 50 or 60, they do sort of kind of look like this. But you know what? This is when they actually start to become more valuable to their company or out in society, right? Because they now can understand what it is, what the problem is that they're trying to solve. Can we speed that up in some way? So here is the innovation. What we need to do is create courses that focus on connecting. Maybe not even all of them. It doesn't have to be many, but we have to give them examples, right? People become good at things that they practice. Right? So let's let them practice. Let's show them examples of how to do it. So here's an example. We mentioned before that I've done some dance. I'm in an improv group. So it's improv dance, improv music, there's improv poetry, so spoken word. We'll even sometimes have sculptors or painters come. And this group has been meeting for about 6 years now. And we would practice together, and we've actually started to perform. And it's, you know, it's a very strange performance, right? Because there's things to look at, there's things to listen to, right? So it's a very multi-dimensional experience. So the question was, can I bring that group together with my engineers and have them work on a project together that will show them how to connect together? So I took the musicians from that group and I introduced them to the engineers. And I said, in 3 months, I want you to deliver to each other, not even to me, but to each other, biomusical instruments. So instruments that would record signals from the body. So it could be heart, it could be brain, it could be, I don't know if you know galvanic skin response. It's actually a measure of emotion, so psychologists will use it. And there are all sorts of other ones, right? So you can actually measure the forces. So if I do this, it will measure the forces on the floor. So you can do that. Like the Wii. You know how the Wii does that when you do yoga? Yeah. So it's like that. And I said, can you take those signals and put them through all sorts of things that you're learning in theory, right? In theory, from your engineering, and turn them into music. send them out to synthesizers. The musicians were going to have to be sort of the customer, but here's something really interesting that happened. The musicians had a stereotype of the engineers. Guess what it was? It was that they were like crystals. They were rigid. They were not creative. And the engineers had a stereotype of the musicians. And what was that? That they have no structure at all. They're not efficient. They're annoying to work with because they're like a gas. They're crazy. They're all over the place. Right? Putting them together showed them something very important. The musicians were able to talk to the engineers about music theory. Has anybody play an instrument? Yeah. A couple of people, right? When you get deep into learning an instrument, it's not just about playing the instrument. There's a theory of music, right? A theory of how chords work and what things sound a certain way together. And you can actually study this at a very, very deep level, like basically a mathematical level. It becomes more like this in music. And the engineers got to see that. These musicians were not living over here. They actually were, in a lot of ways, actually a lot more structured than they thought. And the opposite happened too. The musicians learned that the engineers were not completely rigid and crystals, that they actually were really imaginative if given a chance. So the two groups began to have a lot of empathy for one another. They were able to start seeing that despite their differences and their prejudices, that they were actually a lot more similar than they thought. About halfway through, they came to me and they said, you know, we're making some pretty neat stuff and we want people to be able to see it. We want our friends to come and see. And I said, okay. So we put together a performance. You know, we rented a space. About 2 weeks beforehand, the engineers came to me and they said, we have a problem. I said, uh-oh. That's always dangerous. 2 weeks before the end of a semester, when students come and say, I have a problem, that's usually really bad. Okay? I'm like, uh-oh, what's going to happen now? Well, they said, we're actually better on those instruments than the musicians because we've been building them. They're our instruments, right? Can we play on them instead of the musicians? So we actually got together, we talked about it, and the musicians said, sure. So here were this group of engineers who had learned enough about music theory, enough about performance, that they actually felt comfortable and confident enough to get up with a group of trained musicians playing their instruments. Now again, they didn't know as much about music theory or things like that, but they were able to connect the theory that they were learning, the depth that they were learning, to the breadth. And I've gone on to do other examples of this as well. I promised that group, and this is again, as a professor, I challenge myself all the time. Partially as an example, because I want my students to know that I'm still learning and I'm still trying things. But also because it keeps it interesting for me. So I had no idea where this project was going to go. I didn't even know if it was going to succeed or not. So it was a challenge to me too. So here's the next challenge on top of that. I told that group of students, no other group of students is going to do that project again. I'm not going to repeat this again the next year or the year after that or the year after that. Maybe 10 years from now, maybe I'll repeat it. Right? This year, they're trying to create interactive clothing. So not just embedded computing, but it would be like if our shirts were networked and could talk to each other. And so your shirt could be sending you signals about me. And the question is, and this was the challenge to the students, right, is what's possible? When you start thinking that way, what could happen? What could it mean if clothing is actually networked to one another? But I don't know. That's the great part about the class, right? They're going to create something at the end that I don't know what it's going to be. I don't have any stereotypes or preconceptions of what they're going to do. And they're working with people in the costume shop They're working with a local clothes manufacturer. Their very first lab as engineers was to go to the craft center and learn to sew. They actually made pajamas, the bottoms for pajamas. And they were actually really happy about it because a few of them went back to the craft center and made matching pajamas for their boyfriend or girlfriend. Which I hope their parents didn't find out. That's okay. Okay, so that was a longer story. Questions, comments, observations, just like dissecting out and pulling out what's the story, what's the business analogy. I'd be curious, what's the business equivalence of the story I just told? Yeah.
An equivalent maybe there's an experience as well.
Mm-hmm.
That I work with a lot of developers, which are similar to your engineers.
Mm-hmm.
Brilliant developers, and then also brilliant salespeople. And one of the most amazing things that happens, well, besides that they usually sit on different levels of the
org chart.
building, right? No, not in the org chart, but different levels of the building.
Okay.
They don't really eat lunch together. And it's amazing what happens when they actually take a trip together and the developers sit in front of a client, which doesn't happen a lot.
Uh-huh.
And it's something amazing to see those people who are like crystals, and you put a possibility and experience, you make that happen for them. Yeah. And then that transformation, something is lovely to see.
I think there's something that I want to come back to in that, and that was this idea of taking the trip and having an immersive and maybe even a little bit uncomfortable experience. So if I forget to talk about that, remind me, because that absolutely has a lot of parallels with education. So I want to come back to that. Yeah, there's a...
Yeah. But then sometimes we think we know what a company, for example, expects from us, and we rephrase parts for ourselves, because obviously there are many engineers who love music or sports or many different kind of philosophy or stuff like that. And they sometimes the feeling is that there's no space for that in the company. So
So to build on that just a little bit, we had talked about hiring people who were either a mix of over here or over there. What we're getting at is the idea that maybe you don't want to hire a bunch of people that are here and a bunch of people that are there, but more people that are somewhere in here. And here's the cool part. Does anybody know what Google does for hiring? Have you all heard about Google's hiring process?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's like, legendary, right? There's like 5 interviews, right? So you go, and then you make the cut, and you go to the next interview, and then you make the cut, and you go to the next interview, right? And so you get down the line, and it's like only the most amazing people that make it to the end. So last year, I completely by chance got to meet someone who is in hiring at Google. So this is like, there are books written about how Google hires people. I'm like, I have like one of these people right in front of me, right? This is like a great opportunity to like pick their brain, right? What do they look for? And she said, look, there are a lot of people that apply to Google that have no business being at Google. They're gone, right? But that's the first cut. Then you go to the next cut, right? And that next cut is much more about, is this person actually really technically trained? Are they deep, right? Do they know their field? Are they a good programmer? Are they good at marketing? Are they good at whatever it is that we're going to hire them for? Are they good at it, right? And some of those people know, the rest move on. Then it's a little bit more about, are they a little bit more broad, right? So again, at each cut, it's like a filter. They're getting rid of the people, right, that they go through. Well, here's the thing. And one of those cuts is even, will this person like play well with the other people, right? There's a teamwork aspect to it. By the time they get to the last cut, he said, everybody's qualified. Everybody's nice. Everybody can do the job. that we wrote up. Everybody can do that. But here's the catch. We're looking for the person who has, and this was the term she used, googly eyes. Right? Googly eyes, right? And she even showed me a picture of, Google with the 2 O's with the little eyes, right? We're looking for those people. And I interrupted her and I said, oh yeah, you're looking for the people that fit with Google, right? She said, no, that's not it. That was the cut before, right? At Google, 80% of your job, the thing that was written up in the job description, is what you're going to do for your job. 20% is up to you, up to 20%. And there are other companies that do this too. Google was not the first one. There's 3M, and I think there's probably a bunch of other companies too. But we want people who are going to take that 20% and they're going to make the most of it. They're going to have googly eyes. They're going to be constantly looking to see, where can I use my skills and what could be the next thing? And let me work with the person in marketing or the person over here or the person over there to create the next new thing for Google. The next new cool thing. So it's that the people that actually make it in can do the 80%. That's the first couple of cuts. And the last one is, are they going to do something really cool with that 20%? Those are the people that get hired. So yeah. So other comments? Yeah.
Yes, I think, I understand the idea to focus on, how to find or to hire the right person, the right profile. But it seems to me a bit difficult to be able to find that person that fits right in the middle. So my question is, would it be easier to look for a bunch of different people that putting together, from the efficient side and the creative side, have them mingle together, contaminate each other, and the result be the one in the middle. It seems to me, sort of easier to reach than actually pursue the search of the perfect person, which is right in the middle. And just one additional thing is, I don't know if you know the Losada lane.
I've heard of it.
From Martial Losada. Basically, he developed, he's also a T-shaped person, and he developed a mathematical program or equation to define what are the highly creative teams. And it's close to pi, basically. But the idea is to bring in people from completely different personalities, completely different backgrounds, put them together and reach that high efficiency in terms of creativity within the team. So maybe more than looking for the perfect person is building the perfect team.
Yeah. So there are a couple things that I want to talk about. One is, remember how we talked about some businesses are going to be, they're not in a quickly evolving market. And so maybe it's actually okay to be, maybe not a perfect crystal, right? But you don't need to move that fast. So you are actually more about efficiency. There may be others, and there's a company that I've been working with that's an ad agency, right? They do marketing for people. And all they do is come up with they're constantly thinking about what's the next creative thing and how do we make creative things. Now, they certainly have processes and things, right? But I would say that in terms of the team, it is going to vary a little bit on the company that you're in and the market that you're in. But I think there's actually, in some ways, a more fundamental question going on here. And so there are couple of theories, right? One is Google. You try to just get those people who are already T-shaped, who already kind of are somewhere in here. The other thing you can do, and you'll see certain companies do this really, really well, is training. They have educational programs inside their company that train people. Now here's the thing. What do those training programs do? There are some companies that train you to go even deeper. Right? So what they do is their training program is, you know what? You're a technician or you're a marketing person. We're going to give you training in marketing. And that's going to make you a better marketer. There are others that are much more about showing you opportunities that you might want to go into, right? So you take the engineer who's done really well, but you now send them off to a workshop on marketing. Or you send them, I forgot, where did she go? I think she left, yes. But you send them on something where they learn about something that makes them a little bit more broad. So those are two very different ways of training people, right? And they're informed. It depends on what you're trying to do. But here's the other thing that's been talked about. And there's actually, you mentioned a computer model. This is another computer modeling study of, in a business, maybe what you want, and I'll draw this over here. Maybe what you want is, and again, don't worry about what the lines are, but yeah. You hire a bunch of people that are very deep in tech, right? And you also hire a bunch of people that are very deep in business. And then what you need are a couple of T-shaped people, just a few. You don't need many, right? So the mathematical model was, again, this was important to educators, was it's not efficient in your company if everybody is T-shaped. It's actually better to hire a bunch of people that are straight and a bunch of people that are straight, and all it requires to get information from this side to that side efficiently is that, right? The information goes through these people, the T-shaped people. So again, not saying any one of these is right or wrong. They're different models. They're different ways of thinking about what it takes to have a company that can exist not quite here and not quite there, but somewhere in between. So I'm curious. Again, I'm looking to provoke, right? To provoke a little bit. Yes?
Yes, okay. I have an observation maybe because I think that the system is open. The real situation, because the old people is T or entrepreneur people is the factors in the environmental factors. So if we have the capability for move the factors in the environmental, we are entrepreneurs.
Yeah. So there's been some actually very interesting work done that's along the lines of this, which is, have any of you heard of the growth mindset and the fixed mindset? Okay. So there's a book. I hope I spell her name right. Let's see. Oh, doesn't want to come off. So that's the book. And she's a psychologist. And she talks about how you can have what are called fixed mindset people and growth mindset people. And it's not about success. She says there are lots of people who are fixed mindset people who are very successful. There are also people who are growth mindset who are very successful, right? So she's not making that comparison, and she's a psychologist, so she's done studies. It's not that there's any bias towards things, but there may be a cultural bias, and we're going to get to this. So in the fixed mindset, you see things through the lens of right or wrong. And you either get a reward or you don't get a reward. And the external reward that you get is the reward that you want. And what she says is that our education systems, a lot of businesses, a lot of parents, a lot of our society is obsessed with the fixed mindset. If you don't get a good grade, that must mean you didn't learn anything. Well, you didn't learn the things that were in the class that you were supposed to be learning, but you still might have learned. Now, the growth mindset. These are the people that define success based on an experience and what they learned from something, from that experience. So the difference is that this person is more likely to view a business failure or a bad grade or something as, you know what, but I still learned something by that. Society tells me that I failed, but I didn't because I learned. Now here's her theory. Again, you can believe this if you want or not. There's a distribution, right? Natural distribution. But what she believes is that most of society eventually pushes people to be fixed mindset, to view success or failure as determined by other people, other metrics, not by what they're learning. And what she argues is that the people who really rise to the top, so not just CEO, but become the visionaries, are the people who have adopted the growth mindset. The people who are like Steve Jobs, who dropped out of school because they didn't care about the credential and the fixed grades and the diploma and all of that. They were more interested in what they would learn. Now again, Steve Jobs took a risk, right? A big risk. Didn't work for everybody. That was a very extreme version of it that worked out well. But it's this idea that maybe in society too much we think about the fixed, promoting the fixed mindset and not enough about what have you learned. And so the book is actually really nice because she develops this framework, but then she says there's a chapter on how does this apply to business. If you're a leader in business, how do you reward your employees with learning, more learning, right? And rather than awards. Again, it's a little controversial. What about as a parent? She has a chapter on parenting. Do you reward your kid for getting a good grade in school, or do you reward them when they learn something? And again, they may overlap, right? And maybe that they learned something and they got a good grade, that's okay. But that the focus is not on the grade they got, it's on the learning that they did to get that grade. So again, and she goes on and there's other, she even talks about love lives, right? I mean, it's pretty crazy. She's a psychologist.
Like what?
What's that?
Like what?
Personality. So it's in personality types, but she does personality types, but related to society, right? So how do societies either conflict with or reinforce personality types? So she's at Stanford, so it's an easy book. It's a very easy book to read. So, even though it's in English, I don't know if it's in Spanish. It may be by now. Yeah.
I think this thing about grades, we've all had the experience of beginning a course, even this master's degree sometimes, with all the enthusiasm to learn, and in the end you are thinking about grades and the work you have to do. So the question is, how do you grade your students in your class? How do you deal with that?
Okay, so you got to a great point because I'm in the middle, right? There's my students who, there are things I want to do for them that will encourage learning, right? And there are things like that music project, right? At some level, they didn't care what their grades were anymore. I mean, they did. They cared. But they cared. They weren't constantly asking me, what's my grade? What's my grade? What's my grade? They were saying, how can I make this better? How can I make my instrument better? Because it became more about the performance that they were going to have in front of their friends than the grade they were going to get, right? So there was, again, I can be very cynical and say, which one's more powerful, grades or public shame? when you're a student in college, actually public shame is worse than grades, right? So I was a little bit sneaky. But here's the problem. There's me and there's my students. There's what I would do if that was all there was in the system. I would get rid of grades, right? I would give written evaluations and I would say, this is what you need to improve on, this is the direction you need to go. But that's not all there is to the system. There's a lot more above me that says we are so embedded in grades. Right? We need grades to sort people. When Google wants to make that first cut, are you qualified or not? Guess what they're going to look at? They're going to look at grades. If I gave my students written evaluations, not grades, chances are pretty good Google would say, we don't even know what to do with you, right? You're out. So again, there's a reality there. Now, I'll be very provocative. Yeah.
There's something else, because these guys with that project have forgotten about grades, and they care about the performance. But in the end, they will still get a grade, and they put their heart into it. And if the grade's not good, they say, "What was the point?"
So this is very much a dilemma, right? Because they could get discouraged by that. And so what I will say is that students, and again, this is only a partial answer to this, I don't grade students relative to one another. Right? I don't grade them relative to one another. What I do is I pass out learning objectives. So at the end of this course, you should be able to do this, and this, and this, and this, and this, and this, and this. If in your project, if in this class, you show me that you can do all of these things, you demonstrate to me that you can do all those things, then you get a good grade. And I have feedback with the students, right? So I will tell a student, you're doing great in number 1, number 3, number 5, and number 7, but the rest, you need to keep working on. Because right now you're not going to get a very good grade, because you're focusing all of your energy on a few. So those objectives give me a way of having some feedback with them. So it's a different way, but now the focus is not on the grade, it's on have you learned the things that you need to in the class.
You asked us to remind you about the experience.
Ah, yes. Okay, good. So here's another, well, you know what? Remind me in a minute, because I want to get back to my really crazy radical idea.
Okay.
So this is an example of how I think about entrepreneurship in education. Is there an alternative to grades? It's a fundamental question in education, right? Is there an alternative to grades? So here's what I would propose. So you have to imagine this is coming out of the board, right? It's three-dimensional. This is one example. What if when students came into school, their first year was to find out where they are in terms of their writing? And someone says, on a spectrum, right, of not so good to very good, you're there. It's not a grade, right? It just graphically shows them where they are. Graphically, how can you use graphics to communicate an idea? Maybe you're already very good at that. And oral, maybe you're okay. Now, what you can do, and again, I don't want to get too much into this, is it's not actually that. You have a point now somewhere out in space, right? That's like here. That's where you are right now. And there may be other ones here. You know, if you're an engineer, there might be ones about math, or if you're in, you know, some theater, there may be ones about performance, different types of performance. So different groups could have different ones of these. Now here's the catch. When a student goes through my class, I don't get to see where they are. I don't know, right? So I'm blind. So you're in my class. I don't know what yours looks like. In my class, the grade I give you is a change. Let's say you did a nice job with the oral part of things. What I do is I can move you. And here's the catch. If you're on a sports team, maybe the coach can move you on some. Or maybe you do things in the community. Maybe there's some that are more socially minded, right? So what an employer gets is not a bunch of grades, but they get is this. You started here, and in your classes, you took a path and you ended up there. And so now what do they see? They see learning. They see that you got better. That encourages learning. You want to show employers that you learned something, right? It's not about where you started. It's about, did you actually apply yourself and learn?
In this case, you are trying to evaluate something.
Yeah.
But in our case, we are trying to quantificate and to build a table what is the better.
Right.
And
Right.
this is the conceptual in this learning process.
Right. Right. So again, this may be a crazy idea. I've shared this with people at my school, and they said, we'll never do this. Right? Unless someone else starts to do it too, and then maybe we'll do it. Right? It's the market thing again. So I want to get back to the idea of the immersion.
Let me
Yeah.
comment a little bit on
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
I think in the graduate student's office, we usually look at this in a different way.
Mhm.
Sometimes we can stick into the grade, the final grade, but many times we try to understand the path of the student. If he started
Right.
really bad and then he improves a lot during the year during the bachelor studies.
Sure.
And that shows us a very clear picture about the student and the potential.
Yeah. Right. So, you can think of it as, is a business going to hire you for what you can do right now, or is a business going to hire you because they know you're going to get better? And again, it's a fundamental question, right? Some businesses may say, no, I want you to come in the door. Others may say, I want to see you grow. This would give them information on that. So again, crazy idea, right? Who knows? Maybe someday. So the immersion. I think it was really important, that idea of immersion. Because I think when you're immersed in something, the way you are in jobs and things like that, you learn things that are very difficult to learn if you're in a class that meets an hour here, an hour there, an hour there, an hour there. And I think the mixing of people, too. So here's what I think, one of the things that I think you can learn by that. I'm an engineer. I teach students about the design process, right? How you do engineering design. And when you open up a design book, it says you do step 1, then you do step 2, then you do step 3, then you do step 4. And every once in a while, you take a step back and you think, do I need to come back to another step? Okay, that's great. But in the book, to the students, it looks like do step 1, do step 2, do step 3, right? You go through, and at the end of it, you've made a product, right? You've designed something. Now, for a simple product, that might work. But for one that has to work in the real world, that process doesn't actually work very well, right? It's much messier than that. So how do you teach students to appreciate a messy process? Now, there's a problem with this, right? Students don't do well when you try to teach them messy things, right? Because they say, you're not being clear, I don't know what's happening, right? But they do respond well when you give them do step 1, do step 2, do step 3. So how do you teach the messy process? Here was an idea. There was me and another professor who got together. And we took a group of first-year engineering students. So they're about 18 years old. Right? So they're not that old. We said, look, we're going to give you a problem that is too big for you to solve on purpose. We're not expecting you to be able to solve this problem. We just want you to make a little bit of progress. The problem we gave them was restoring and improving urban infrastructure, right? So the cities. And then we led them through a series of activities. We never put up the design process. We just said, go out and take pictures of things in cities. Go look for problems. Now sit down as a group and talk about which problems do you think are the worst, which ones do you think you might be able to solve, right? So kind of we were just asking them questions to try things. And we did this all the way through testing, through validation, through all of these things, but we were constantly asking them to think about the problem that they picked from the engineering 5-foot level, how do you put the screw here and the bolt there and all of that, all the way up to what we called the 50,000-foot view, which was what's the potential economic impact or social impact? Are there ethical considerations in your project, right? So really getting them to dive into things that were more T-shaped, not even engineering as much. Here's what was amazing. The end of this process, there were some neat products. So this was 10 days that the students did this. 18-year-old students. There was a bus seat that they had created, a full-size bus seat. It was a normal bus seat, but during rush hour, you could put it up into the ceiling, and it had handles. Right? So during rush hour, you could put more people on the bus. Again, there are some minor problems with that in some places, but it was a really interesting idea, and they actually built the product. There was another group that worked on modifications to the subway trains so that it wouldn't screech, right? It was loud. And so they had a very simple way of doing that. There's another group that was going to collect rainwater in the gutters as well as falling from buildings to power wheels, store them in batteries, and they would shine the lights at night, right? The street lights. And there were a bunch of others. There were a whole bunch of others. We asked them at the end, draw your process, right? Reflect. What did your process look like? Draw it out for us. And what they showed us was not step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. Right? It was a big, messy, ugly-looking network with lots of boxes and arrows, and right? It was a mess. And then we did the next step after that. And that was we had them all post them up around the room. And all the students got to go and look at what did the other groups write. And then we had what I would say was a meta-reflection on what themes did you see. Right? Where did most people start? And where did they end? And more or less, how did things flow? We also asked, how are they different? Right? So the group that did the subway thing had a different picture, a different flow than the group that did some of the other projects. And we started talking about why did your process look this way and your process look that way? Then we showed them the engineering design, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and they laughed at it. And we said, if you tried to follow that process in your project, would it have worked? He said, maybe, but it would have taken a lot longer than 10 days, right? So that was one piece. And that's something that you can do, I think, in immersion that would have been hard to do in a class, that type of thing. So I know that was abstract. I want to give a story that you've already heard the story, that I think for the last little bit, I want you to comment on in a business sense. So I'm first generation Italian. My father came over with his family when he was about 10 years old. And my grandmother she didn't speak any English, or very little English, couldn't read, really couldn't count. I mean, she had no education, but she was an amazing cook. All the recipes were in her head because she couldn't write them down, right? So she made these amazing pepper biscuits. So you take dough and you make it like basically a bread, but then you fry it and you keep frying it until it's crunchy. So it's like a biscuit. And as a kid, I remember having these and they were very good. Well, my mother wanted to learn how to make these. So she went over one day and she said, well, I'm gonna watch you make it and I'm gonna write down everything that you put into this. So she did that, and my grandmother was telling her, it's not gonna work. You can't do it that way. It's not gonna work, right? In like very broken English. But my mother did it anyway. She wrote it down. She went home, she tried to make it, and guess what? Didn't work. I mean, it was okay, but it wasn't the same. Something was different. And she went back and she said, but I wrote down everything that you put into this. And she said, look, that recipe changes depending on the season, depending on the type of flour that I get from the store. It depends on the humidity in the air. I don't have a recipe because when I make it, I feel the dough and I say, it needs a little bit more flour, right? Or I taste it, I say, it needs a little bit more salt, right? So we've all seen cooks who do this, right? So here's the connection I want to make, and then we can talk about this a little bit. I think in business, in parenting, when I teach, all of this, this is what happens if you follow a recipe blindly. It's all right. It's efficient. It's repeatable. It doesn't always come out the same way every time because you're always dealing with an open system. In your business, there's always going to be humidity. There's always going to be a little bit different flour. Right? There are factors that you don't have control over that will mean that the recipe, the efficiency that you try to build in will not always work. So the other problem is if you didn't have any recipe and you just randomly tried to mix things together. So what you need is exactly what we were trying to get the students to do in design, which is there is a recipe, but that recipe is a guideline. It's much more dynamic than that. And you're adapting as you go. And the last thing I'll end with before we do some questions is to go back to physics. Guess what physicists say about the systems that live here? They say that they're complex, adaptive systems. Biology is here. They argue that the economy is here. That anything that's able to sustain itself over time is open, and it works like the recipe. There's a blueprint, DNA, right? It's a recipe, but is it followed exactly every single time? Not exactly. It's just a recipe. There's some things built in that depend on the environment. So, I know there's probably lots of questions, because I've seen some of you waiting to get your hands up. So, questions? I scared everybody away.
When you make that drawing, I thought it's like cooking. I think because it's like sometimes a good team is the same as a good food that tastes good. Has different elements, and it doesn't mean that you have to put all of them, or all the ingredients have to be sometimes different, but not. And one person cannot be all the ingredients at the same time.
Exactly. Right. This is an argument for having some diversity, right, in your group. And I'm not talking about, like diversity in the way that a lot of times politicians talk about it, right? But diversity of types of people and thinking and skill sets and all of that. But I think the thing is that if you're making an omelet, if your business is an omelet, that's a different set of ingredients, right, than if you're trying to make a souffle, right, or something else. And so I think the thing is you need to be adaptive, right? You don't use all the ingredients all the time to make a product, but it depends on your business, which things you actually need. And that goes back to the alignment, right? If you're not aligned, if the people you have are not aligned to the product that you're making, you're not going to do very well. So, yeah, other questions?
What's the influence of the use of social media?
on all of this?
Yeah, for example, you have efficient people, creative people. Nowadays we interact on an hourly basis with WhatsApp or whatever.
So I don't know, but here's a guess. I think that it's made the systems much more open. Right? Whereas there was lots more private information, I think there's less now. And that's caused things to move more quickly. It's also meant that, the exercise that we did, it means you need to be keeping track of more things, that maybe it's not enough to know exactly where that person is. You might need to know a little bit more accurately where they are. So yeah, I think social media is great. I think there's some awesome things about it, but I think it's meant that things move faster, which frankly is the story that people in big data tell us, right? So you've all heard the term big data, right? So it's the people that have algorithms that can go and do things like crunch social data, right? Well, why do they exist? Well, it's because you need information about all of this but there's so much of it and it's all so disorganized that what you want is 1 or 2 numbers or a graph that can tell you where that, more or less where that person is, right? So yeah, that's a way of thinking about social media. Again, that's not the only, there's a lot going on in social media. I mean, it's pretty amazing. Yeah.
And you teach undergrad students to become more innovators. Does it make more sense to do it to preschool kids? Because if at the end of the day you want them to be in the middle, it's much easier to train already creative minds to be efficient than train efficient minds to be creative.
So this is a question, right? And I actually agree with you, but I would still want to ask the question of, is it easier, if you're naturally more over here, is it easier to learn to go this way than it is to be here and learn to go this way?
Oh yeah, totally.
Does everybody agree?
It's almost like nature versus nurture. You get the nature there, you don't invent it. You get the nurture there, and you can actually put it into a process.
But this question has a huge impact on if you have someone in a business and you're going to do training, right? So I agree, preschool, all of that for sure. But if you're hiring people, if that was really true, that it was easier to take someone from here and move them this way than it was the other way around, then as a business, if you have a good training program, maybe you should hire all people over here, right? Because you can train them to do that. But if you hire a bunch of people over here, maybe it's a lot harder to train them there. So it's not that I disagree, it's that it says something profound about the types of people that should be in businesses.
And also it says that it would also explain why, 1% of the population are innovators and successful people, and the rest of us, the 99% of us are.
Well, and this actually gets to another fundamental question about innovation. How much of it is luck?
Some of it.
If something very slightly changed in Steve Jobs' life, would he have been as innovative as he was? If Apple hadn't hired him back, that was not up to him, right? If Apple hadn't hired him back, would we talk about him the same way? Or if he hadn't met Steve Wozniak, to go back even farther, would we be talking about him today? I don't know. Maybe, right? This is the problem with human innovators, right? Is you can't rewind and try it again, right? So it's a fundamental question. It's an almost philosophical question.
Yeah, I think that one of the good things, I'm not sure which way is easier. I really don't have an answer. But I think it depends a lot as well on kinetics. The stage of your life where you are. Because even though you're very creative, sometimes it's just not possible to be able to acquire knowledge in a T-shaped sort of field. Because the moment was when you had a certain age, and that's it. It's very difficult to acquire specific technical knowledge. So in that way, maybe there is a point of non-return in some aspects. Whereas someone that has a very technological sort of depth that had acquired, maybe is also already in time to acquire some sort of creative tools.
So in other words, I think what you're saying is that it may be that in a developmental process, one of these develops earlier than the other.
Yes.
So in other words, when you're a child, you may be more over here, but then it takes a certain degree of maturity to reach here, but societies push us this way. Is that?
Somehow.
Okay.
Somehow. I think there is sort of a time to acquire a certain specific knowledge, and that sort of imposes sometimes a lot of limits. Where some other skills can be learned in different moments in life.
So here's another alternative. And I would argue that this is actually me. I would say that there was, growing up, when it came to music, I was here. When it came to math and physics, I was here. And they were very separate parts of my life for a long time, and it wasn't until I was like almost 40 that they started to come closer together. Right? And so again, they were very separate parts of my life. And I could be creative in one arena of my life and very fixed and stable in another, and it was only later in life that I was able to see how to bring them together. So again, I'm using this as a way of provoking thought, way of thinking. Yeah.
No, I think creative is the side of our intuitive thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the other side is our part of analytic thinking. And today is more evaluate this side, analytic thinking. You can make more money. You spend your time with service, with analytic thinking.
Right.
But we think someone is smart when use this other side, that's intuitive thinking. We are discussing about what is more important, or what would be the social move from analytic to the intuitive thinking, or what is the best point in this track.
Yeah, and I mean, again, I'm doing all of this to be very provocative, right? Because all of these theories have some pretty profound implications about how we should structure societies and how we should educate people and how we should run economies and make decisions, right? They have some pretty profound implications. Again, as a single person, I mean, I'm proposing this, but I personally haven't even sorted out exactly how I feel about all of this. Right?
But you could broke that I can develop my analytic thinking, but I feel sure with me I can travel to other side.
Right.
But a lot of people are thinking if I can get money if I develop my analytic thinking and I studied, I don't know, doctor in a very specific thing because I can be the expert in this science, in this area, in this job. I think when you can get this, I sure, but this skill, the depth side of the T-shape, yeah, you can travel the other side, but this part of the education.
So I smell food. So here's what we can do. We can either go and do the food, or we can do one more exercise where you all have to get up. One more exercise. Okay, here's what I want you to do. You need to find somebody who's roughly about the same weight and maybe even like strength as you. So again, I know that may be tricky. And then I'll do actually, let me do the demonstration first, and then you can decide if you want to do it or not. So who has a good back? Somebody who can pick me up, right? Pick me up. Come on, somebody needs to be able to do that. Yeah. Oh, good. Very good. All right. Okay. So here's what we're going to do. You're going to around me and pick me up. Okay? Okay. Easy, right? Okay, you can put me down. Okay. Now, try again. Okay. So, you did it. Was there a difference?
A lot.
Okay, there was a lot. Okay. Did I gain any weight? No, I didn't gain any weight that you know of, right? I put on a bunch of bricks. Right? No, I didn't gain any weight. So how does that work? Right. So as a biomedical engineer, I could tell you all sorts of stories about, well, it's about the geometry and it's about how I did this and that. If anyone has ever tried to pick up a baby or kid that doesn't want to be picked up, or a dog that doesn't want to be picked up, right? They go, right? That's the same thing that I basically did. Was you saw me go, right? I got all like, you know, right? Whereas the other way, I was, right? I was light, more like, you know, the way we think of dancer, right?
It's all about go with the flow.
Go with the flow. Now, thank you. So, the question is, do you want to try it? Here's the thing. Maybe, here's what we'll do. We're going to go out and we're going to have something to eat. If you want to try it, try it. Find someone who's adventurous and wants to try this. It really is pretty amazing how much different it is when you do it or not. But here's the question. What can we map this to in business? And I'll give you my version, and then we won't get answers from everyone. You can think about what your version might be. We all work on teams. And we heard that multidisciplinary teams are good, right? But they're good to work. Sometimes you need to be the support and the heavy one, right? The one that's grounding everything. Other times, maybe you could be more the light one, right? So as an engineer, there are times when it comes to the technical design and we're talking about my area of depth, I need to be very strong, very rigid. I am the center of the team at this moment, right? And the marketing people and all these other people are kind of very light, right? But then there may be moments when the marketing person has to become very heavy, right? And the engineer needs to learn to be a little more light. So again, this goes back to the dynamic process thing, right? It doesn't work if everybody's all heavy all the time or if everybody's all light all the time. And it also doesn't work if you have an individual who spends all their time being heavy, right? Expecting everyone else to be light. You need to be able to be both. So I'll let you figure out what it means to you.
That also has to do a little bit with what I was explaining about the Lusada theory. Because basically what it's saying is that for one sort of negative view, you need to have 3 positives. So it's like basically, you know, the strong one, but then if you have one strong one, you probably need like 3 light ones to actually make it move to one direction.
Very good. Well, thank you. Let's go get food. Thank you.